recorded live.
Hey, this is Kevin from Ascension Energy Program with Bill Kirkland tonight. The topic is a little bit more theoretical, or what if we're going to do tonight. We're basically going to say, what if these technologies actually have the capacity for anti-aging or age reversal, and what would you do if you had the energy and a second chance in life? So basically, it's from our experiences with mostly the water product, the etheric water, over the last two or 3 months, and we've seen some pretty interesting results from the client base, as well as me personally, and certainly Bill. And the combining of the bioresonance and the etheric water together is producing some interesting phenomena. And I would say, I would go back, a little bit in my life. I was 26 years old, and I was looking into, developing energy technologies, and I was wondering, the tragedy of life with people aging very rapidly and how they had all this wisdom and knowledge, and yet they couldn't apply it often because of the pressures of their life. Maybe they got married young, had a bunch of kids, and then you go through the midlife crisis, and then you realize that a lot of the things that you wanted to do, you didn't actually get to do, and that you were chained by all these responsibilities, and then life just kind of took control of you, or the environment took control of you, and you begin. Life is basically a series of compromises, and so you start shutting down the dreaming process, the potential for living the life that you had you wanted originally when you were a kid, and so then it's really about living maybe for your kids, maybe for other people, and it's you start the self-sacrifice program, and you have to work hard to put your kids through college, this and that, and all this other stuff, and then the whole plan that you originally had just kind of gets washed away in the stresses of life, and I think that certainly was something that I didn't want to go through. I saw my parents, how basically financial troubles just basically tore apart their marriage, and it certainly wasn't what they wanted to do, and it was certainly something that I never wanted to go through myself, and luckily I haven't. I noticed that a lot of my early 20s and things, I knew my life was going to be a wreck, probably up to like my mid-30s. And I knew that, the lessons I was learning, there was no quick out. And so I chose a path that was sort of like starting the spiritual journey very young. I was going to monasteries, praying, contemplation, this and that, and then diving into yoga. And so I sort of did it in reverse from what most people do, is they hit the midlife crisis and then they start going internal and start seeking, higher answers, later in life. I did it actually early in life, and I've kind of come out the other side going into the material realm. Sort of, after 35 is when I started really focusing on making money, building businesses and bridges outside rather than internally. And, one of the things that, I saw with older people was I always had an affinity for older people even when I was young, like 21. A lot of my friends were older, and I would engage in these, philosophical, theological, political discussions when I, even as a prepubescent, as a teenager. And even before then, I was always interested in different things. And we have now today we have this culture of youth. It's all about the young. If you look in the media, we're worshiping 21, 22-year-olds who don't have a clue or a brain, and they're not supposed to be role models, and they don't really have much value other than the fact that maybe they look pretty to offer to society. And so we've created this dumbed down culture, which if you have your faculties together and you've been working on yourself for 20, 30 years, you realize it's a total joke how we've inverted society to such an extent that we're basically your life is over by 25 in a lot of respects. If you're a model or something, it's like, what do you do then? Or as an athlete, And, the culture basically doesn't appreciate what you have to offer, even over 40 as a male, unless you're the conquering CEO or something, or you made $1 billion, and then people start to value your efforts, perhaps, in the context of the modern, I wouldn't call it American culture, but let's say modern commercial culture that's sort of been foisted upon us artificially. And I think right now what I'm noticing is we're throwing off the artificial forces, and I think it's primarily being done through the new spiritual technologies. I mean, there's other factors at work in evolution of man in general, but I believe that all the energy technologies being developed primarily in America and Germany as well have really shifted and accelerated the path of mankind. And I know in my life, it wasn't until I encountered bioresonance, radionics, orgone type of technologies that I really started to make massive spiritual progress. And it was tied to the energy levels basically found within my life. And, when I was in yoga, they used to say, you do all these mantras and yada, 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 and you'll be able to maintain, positive states of consciousness and all this other stuff. And I never really found that to work within the context of living in an urban environment with a full life that you have to kind of support yourself and do all these other things. It might have been true if I had a little trust fund and I didn't have to go and hunt and gather and do all that other stuff, but I never really found it to really work because so much time was needed to devote in order to maintain whatever energy gains I was gaining from these traditional spiritual systems. And not that they don't work, it's just I think they're a bit outdated for the modern world, and certainly in modern Western culture. New wine for new wineskins is really the approach I started looking at. And with the, energy technologies, I'm finding out that it's sort of like a shortcut, a massive, acceleration just by the application of technology. Now we've all seen technology that harms man, and now I believe we have technology that helps man. We're with the bioresonance and the water technology, we basically have a technology that brings in unity consciousness, up through 6 dimensions. And I noticed that it doesn't really require much effort other than if you have enough humility just to kind of follow the leads of the promptings of the spirit, guided by the increases of energy within your physical body, as well as the removal of negativity and fear. And it's the absence of fear love shines through. It's sort of like addition by subtraction. You get rid of the star player that's a pain in the ass, and often the team comes together and harmonizes. And so when you cut out these big lead weights, which I define as karma, which would be stains on your genetic blueprint, and you begin to wash and scrub and clear these things up, everything just kind of rises up and unifies, and life just begins to accelerate. And one of the byproducts is this massive childlike enthusiasm that begins to enter into your life. And you literally start like you did as a young adult and perhaps as a teenager even though you still maybe older, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, but you start beginning to operate like a youth again, which means you don't necessarily want to stay at home. You want to go out and experience life. You become active on a lot of levels. You start to do a lot of things that would be normally with someone that's a bit younger. And, so basically, what if you had the ability to live a life that you never did before? Would you be able to apply all that wisdom and knowledge that you gained over the course of your life? What if you could totally reinvent culture as it stands today? My personal belief with the older people that have joined the Ascension Energy Program, those are the ones that have shot up and absorbed the energy and changed the most over a quickest period of time, because they already have developed talents and abilities. They already have very high character because they haven't given up on life, and they've sort of found this stuff, this possibility. And, they just sort of take the energy and run with it.